morning, everyone, and welcome. My name is Kyla Hannington, and I'm the Public Outreach and Engagement Division Manager with the Prince George's County Office of Human Rights. With me tonight are the Executive Director of the Office of Human Rights, Renee Battlebrooks, and the Assistant Director, Jose Villegas. We've been doing this diversity dialogue with the library system. We're in our 4th year now. It's been an incredible series. It started between myself and Michelle Hamill, who was the CEO, one of the CEOs of the library system before she left in the middle of last year. And I've been very gratefully joined by Renee and Jose, as often a rotating guest from the library. So this month we are celebrating Arab American Heritage Month. And as we were looking at what title to read, and of course, when you look at different books, there's a whole bunch of choices. And one of the things that came to mind for me thinking about this was a thinker named Edward Said. And I'm going to introduce a little bit about Edward Said by reading to you from the Washington Post. And then we'll talk a little bit about this book and what we learned from it. So this is from the Washington Post. I'll put the link into the chat once I'm done reading it. So it says the term othering has spread in usage and today is often used in the context of social justice movements. But the concept has a long history, especially in terms of our understanding of non-Western cultures. For decades, academics have studied how Americans see the Middle East, a research area in large part originating from Edward Said's 1978 book, Orientalism. Said, a Palestinian-American academic and comparative literature professor at Columbia University, characterized the West's dominant cultural understanding of the East, especially the Islamic world, as a patronizing one, in which people from the Orient were portrayed as less civilized than Europeans. He argued that this was evident in the scholarly work of early European writers who presented false and stereotyped representations of the people of Asia, North Africa, and Middle East as exotic, irrational, and essentially childlike others, a different people in need of better government. Said's theories have provided grounds to criticize the portrayal of Middle Eastern art and media, and they have also become fundamental to the discipline of post-colonialism, offering an explanation of the rise of imperialism. So I'll put that link to the article in the chat in just a minute. But what I was thinking was so interesting about Said is this concept of othering, and that the dominant culture needs to create an inferior other as part of its own, its identity building for dominant culture. So that's a very long introduction to this book that we chose, which is his memoir, which is called Out of Place. And it is, rather than being an academic study, it is the story of his, or how he chose to recount his life towards the end of his life. I think this came out in the early 1990s. So with that introduction, Renee and Jose, Out of Place.
So I think that I want to talk about othering for a moment because we haven't moved past this 19, right? He called us out 30 years ago, right? And that was actually before 9/11.
Yeah, 1978.
Oh, his book, I thought it was a 19...
Orientalism came out in 1978.
It's 1999.
Gotcha. Gotcha.
But,
okay, so
other one is 78.
Okay, so we're talking almost 50 years.
Yeah.
And I guess my question then goes to, we're still othering, and othering has taken on pronounced narratives in our current political discourse or non-discourse, right? So if we haven't learned in 50 years about the harm and the dangers of othering, let's unpack that. Like, what are we doing? What are we going to do?
Well, that I mean, if that would be a very difficult, I think, challenging question to answer, because even if we go further to the past, like even the writings of Christopher Columbus when he was describing the natives, in this side of the world. So it's not necessarily just the last 50 years, but I mean, I think he probably expanded on the concept of what the dominant culture saw other throughout the world. right? I mean, because he was talking how the Europeans and how they saw it specifically his region, right? But we also know how the Europeans saw other regions in the New World, I guess, back in the 1500s.
Right.
So yeah, so that's what I'm saying. Like, it kind of difficult to answer the question because it's been that's been the view for century,
Yeah.
way
Yeah.
way before he specifically addresses the same kind of ideas of othering in the 70s.
No, you're right. I guess I think that in this, we believe that we're so enlightened now, right?
Yeah.
And we believe that we are so accepting, and we are so, all of these wonderful things, we like to pat ourselves on the back, and right.
Yeah.
But if we are, why haven't we, right? I mean, I think human nature is to put someone down, to make yourself, or what you don't understand has a negative connotation.
Mm-hmm.
But
And that's happening now too. I mean, that's
You're right.
happening now. And so is the idea of kind of dividing people. I'm here and other people are there. Something that we heard earlier today about a certain group taking other people's jobs. So we're still doing that now.
Yeah.
In this country, in this country that we see ourselves very enlightened.
Yeah.
Like, I'm thinking to your question. I'm sorry, I really seem to have the cough, so I might have to mute, but I'm going to try to get through it here. I was thinking of the question, like, what can we do? And I feel like this is the same thing that I say all the time, but I do feel like it's in this case, like, once I start thinking about this concept of othering, right, that we need to, or humans choose to create that we choose, it is a choice to create a category of the other, determine who goes into that other, and to other someone is to dehumanize them. And so I think one thing is to recognize, in what way do I do that? When am I thinking about those people? And for some people, again, I'm going to throw, these are things that we're familiar with. It may be men, it may be women, it may be people of a certain race, it may be people who vote a certain way, or who we perceive as voting a certain way. It may be people who dress differently than us, or we perceive as having a different faith than us. I'm so sorry. It could be, any one of those ideas of the other. I mean, I certainly, I'm not going to pretend that I don't sometimes think like that I don't sometimes see or hear or read something. I mean, for me, my biggest weakness is political opinion right now. And I'm not going to pretend that that's not true. Like, I can other people based on my presumed beliefs about how they voted and my presumed beliefs about what that meant. And so so to me, the answer, like, what can we do about, we're still othering, is like, on an individual level, catch ourselves when we, to the best of our ability, right? It's all about growth, but catch ourselves when we're doing it and try not to fall into this trap that has done so much harm throughout, the history of humanity.
I mean, you're right. It's very easy to say and hard to do. You're right. I think that in the current, the political climate of the day, I am guilty of othering. It is true. I make those judgments. I try not to, but then you're like, well, right? I am not going to go spend my money at blah, blah, blah. I am not going, right? What's the line between othering and taking a stand?
I guess one is probably, and I'm really sorry,
that's okay.
One is probably, one is based on assumptions and stereotyping and, frankly, bias, which, again, when we talk about othering, is probably negative bias, not positive bias. And taking a stand may be when you actually have information on an individual, which is not a group of people, but an individual. So, for instance, maybe somebody says something that, like, I'm not sure that that's accurate. And in fact, Jose mentioned something that happened earlier today where something was said and the opportunity was there for someone else, in this case, Renee said, I'm not sure. Is that? Let's talk about through that. There was no disrespect or disregard, but there's an opportunity to engage in a dialogue. And so I guess taking a stand is appropriate in the individual setting, whereas othering is making negative assumptions. I think. What do you think?
I don't know. I mean, I asked the question, but I don't know. Can there be an element of taking a stand and othering at the same time? Can they coexist? You definitely have the facts. But is othering just without facts?
Well, I think you can't, if you're ever making, you never have facts about an entire group of people.
True.
So that would be the othering. If you,
you're right.
We need to get Edward Said back from the dead here to talk us through these difficult concepts. I think.
Yeah, because to me, it's just depend how you see it, right? And from your point of view, you see it as taking a stand. From somebody else's point of view, it's you might be doing the othering portion. So I think it just depend from your. Or depend from the point of view of whoever it's from the point of view of that individual.
But aren't we kind of raised to, take a stand on that issue? So I guess maybe the distinction then, I'm just processing out loud, really. Maybe the distinction is taking a stand without taking a personal, without making it personal, perhaps, to a group. I don't know.
But then you wouldn't be taking a stand against a group. You'd be taking a stand on an issue.
On an issue, exactly.
Well, othering is about the invention of difference between peoples.
Okay.
So it's the invention, it's the creation of difference. At least that's how I understand it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And I'm just aware of the fact that I'm not immune to doing it on an individual level. And also, like, I grew up in the same world that y'all did, and so I would get textbooks with the unnamed indigenous chief in a drawing, with the named white male, English or Spanish explorer. So there's this erasure of names. And so did that have an impact on me? Like, do I think of do I have an awareness without choosing to educate myself? Do I have an awareness of the histories of the place where my feet literally are on, as compared to the history of places, thousands of miles away? And the answer is no. Like, unless I choose to take it, that we live in a world where those histories are erased and continue to be erased. Right. And so I think that, it's through sort of daily conscientiousness about this. I'm not in an abusive way, but just, hey, what are the narratives that I have about people, including like my own group, whatever group I assign myself, that are truthful or not truthful, and are people really vastly different? And I guess Said would say, although he did not say this in his book, so we're getting a little carried away, but I think Said would probably say that really these differences are they're created differences versus actual differences in humanity. Yeah. I do want to say we have a question already, and I know it's I thought I'd pop it because it's really important. It's Miss Vivian is wondering, when you say out of place, what are you referring to? This is such a great question because it's actually the title of the book, but it has so much more meaning than that. And so I appreciate the fact you're asking it. So out of place is what he named his memoir, but I think talking about why that the memoir has the place is is foundational to this conversation tonight.
Could it be, I know the other question, the other topic that we were discussing was the othering, that a book that somebody decided not to select for this discussion. But could it be the title of this out of place, probably maybe the thing that, he was born in Jerusalem, Palestine, but he was American, and that he came here, he was here, he went to school here at some point, and and probably that feeling of that you are America, but that you can't relate to being an American because you spend most of your time, where the place that you were born, you were American because your dad was America, not because you were born here. Could it be probably that the outer place?
Yeah, I was also struck in the earlier part of the book. It kind of talked about like never really feeling part of, like, even if it was with the family in Palestine, or right, like there was always this feeling of not quite belonging 100%, right? There was always something tugging that was different.
That's true, because he lived in Jerusalem, then he moved to Egypt, then he went to other places too, and for the summer. So it's like that movement, that the dynamic, family dynamic too, of how the father interacted with him. How
it's funny because part of that actually resonated with me, honestly, because I was just having this discussion actually with my husband. Like, when somebody asks, where are you from? What does that mean? Right? And so he's like, where you're from means where are you born? But that's not where I'm from.
Well,
that's just where I was born. Right?
Yeah.
And so, as a former colleague said, like, for me, like, national origin is it's not, because it doesn't make sense to me, right? What is identity? How is it developed? Where does it come from? For most, identity is like embedded in your family and where you're from, where you're born, right? But anyway, Kyla, go ahead, because you were.
No, I was just relating to that comment. I mean, for me, it's a little bit simpler, like on a personal level, because I was born in Canada to settler Canadian parents who'd been there for, somewhat multiple generations. And so there's, on one hand, you think it's simple, except I've lived in many different places. And so we'll say, where are you from? I do feel like I can't just say I'm from Canada. I'm like, well, do you have 5 minutes? We're going to go through the whole thing. It all started in 1973, and then we're just going to go all the way through. And I think that it's, part of it is because this idea of where we're from. I think what we're reacting to, Renee and Jose, I'd be curious. Like, I think all three of us have had, different stories about how we got to in Maryland right now. And I feel like sometimes the where you're from is a question, and I understand it's lovingly meant. People want to kind of understand us. Mm-hmm. And so if we are humans categorize. So where are you from? And Renee, you can say you're from, I'm making this up, Renee is not from Arkansas, but Renee can say, oh, I'm from Arkansas. And people will say, oh, okay. Like, and I can say I'm from Canada, and people say, oh, okay. Whatever that story is. But for all of us, our story, that's not as simple, and it's not simple. And to be, if someone said to you, Renee, where are you from? You said, I'm from Maryland. That would erase, huge, important portions of your life. And that's kind of what I felt with this book, like out of place, like that and I don't know if you all feel like this. Like, I was talking to, I'm sorry, I'm all over the map, but I have a thought. Let's see if we can follow it around. I was talking to a friend on the weekend who also is an immigrant to the United States, as am I. And we were talking about the fact that to some extent, we don't really feel, it's not that we don't feel at home here, but it's like our house is built on sand. And so it's like we're just passing across the surface of the land. There's an absence of depth or deep roots or deep history. And even though I've lived here for a long time and I have family members here and I have a happy life here, I don't feel as comfortable or even maybe as happy or as rooted as I am, in my home country. And what my friend was saying, who's also an immigrant, she was saying that she thinks it's a very common experience for immigrants that they never feel that you feel in this constant out of place experience. It doesn't mean that you're unhappy or that you want to be living someplace else or anything, but that you're not quite rooted in the spot. So for each of you, does that resonate?
It does. I think what I usually answer when somebody asks, where are you from? It's like, I'm really not from anywhere. I'm just from, I'm from wherever my family is at any given time. That's where I'm from, right? My parents are Americans, and kind of leave it at that. But yeah, but I guess for me, the grounding comes, and maybe because of how, we grew up, it's not rooted in a place, it's rooted in a concept. Does that make sense? And so for me, it was always, again, where sort of my nuclear family was growing up.
Mm-hmm.
Now that I'm married and, family, that's where I'm from at this moment, but I'm not from Maryland, but I live in Maryland. So right now it is complex.
Mm-hmm.
Out of place. So, it really touches on all of it. But Jose, what do you think?
I was just going to tell Miss Vivian that's pretty much what the out of place means. Like, we don't. It's a very complex topic because she has the specific question of what it means of the out of place is just different. But yeah, just touching what you mentioned. I think sometimes when somebody asks me where you're from, I do have to most of the time ask the question, what do you mean? Because I don't know what they asking from what you're from. They want to know where I was originally from. And then I usually say, well, I was born in El Salvador, right? In El Salvador. So, but if somebody, so I have to ask that because I think I've been here most of my life. I sometimes am accused of not having such attachment to my former country, because it's like I have no family members over there, and so I came here when I was a certain age. I've been here most of my life, so it's and so, but yeah, if somebody asks me a question, where you from, I have to ask. Sometimes I usually ask, what do you mean? Because I want to know whether they're asking me, are you from a specific, you live in a specific state or of the United States, or what country in Central America are you originally from? Or, so
No.
I think I do a follow-up question most of the time.
But I was doing that, and then I would get these quizzical looks like, well, like, where were you born? It's like, where I was born is not where I'm from.
Wow.
Right. And then I realized that as I was gauging people's response, that they thought I was being like difficult. So I stopped asking, like, what do you mean? Right.
Because
so
I think because I think is especially in your case, like, you were born in one place, but since you were growing up, you were an American, right? So so that challenge I was born in a different country, but I was an American. Like, on the other hand, Kyla was born in Canada and Canadian, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I was born in El Salvador, so I'm Salvadorian. You were born in another country, but you were American. So that's the challenge, and that's the challenge that's different there. It's like, if somebody were to ask you where you're from, you already know I think for me, it's just you immediately say, I'm American, even though
that's what I ended up saying. Like, I'm not from anywhere. I'm just plain old American. Not from anywhere.
Did you have an experience of like having sort of a part of your identity, and this is going to relate to the book, I promise. We're going to get back there. But having part of your identity being sort of shaped about being from someplace other. Because as Jose was saying, Kyla was born in Canada, she thinks true. And when I was 14, I moved to Hawaii. And I lived in Hawaii when I was 14. And then I lived on, and we don't need to unpack, we'll be here all night. But I've lived in other places. And so much of my identity was about being foreign. It was about being someplace other. And so in my 30s, I went to Canada and I lived in Canada. And then people would say, and I lived in the same province where I was born. Now provinces are ginormous, but still it's the same. I mean, the same part of Canada where I was born. And people would say to me, where are you from? And it was very hard to all of a sudden be this kid from Sicamous now living in Nanaimo. To just say, because that felt, so here I am, I'm in my home country, I'm in Canada, but to say, it was like I had an identity of being from other, and then to be in Canada now, I wasn't other anymore. I was just,
yeah.
Did you have that? Like, how was that for you, Renee, coming back to the States?
Yeah. Yeah, my identity is, I mean, all of my formative years, it was just that I was American, no matter where I was American. That was the identity, right? So yeah, you're right, coming back here, and maybe that is the source of some of the question, or the like, yeah. I'm sort of processing. And then negative experience. Yeah, I mean, I've had my share of profile based on where I was born on my passport, flying back into the country and getting sent to the other line. You cannot tell me there's not profiling going on.
Right.
And so it's like, okay. I was American the minute I popped out, irrespective of what, my passport says where I was physically born. So it's fascinating. And it is complex, and it begs the broader question, like, what does it matter, right? It's back to human nature. We like people to fit in boxes.
Yeah.
No, that's a great question, Susan. Yeah.
Yes, Susan Roberts says, do you feel out of place the same way that Edward Said did?
I don't know. Jose, Kylo, what are your thoughts?
Oh, I'll go. I mean, Jose, I don't want to jump over you, but I'll start and you can jump in.
No, go ahead.
I would say no, Susan, and for all the people who are listening or watching, his story is so layered. And it's super fascinating. I'll also say, I'll be honest, I found the book a little on the dense side, and it was because maybe because I'm dense up here and it was hard to get through for me, truthfully, because he's a super smart person who's put in a lot of geography and that doesn't necessarily make sense to me. So I want to just be honest about that I found this book a little challenging. But I did feel like his description of being out of place is really to do with, first of all, his name. And not just being named Edward, but even Said, where did that name come from in his family? And so he starts talking about the different names, and then his dad changed his first name and then his last name, and then where they lived and where the mom was from. And there's a part in there where he talks about his mom. I'd have to look at the exact line because he talks about his mom speaking perfect Egyptian. And then he says, except for people in Egypt, what he heard is like perfect Egyptian was a type of Arabic that was like that foreigners spoke. And so every sort of part of his world wasn't just about moving and living in other places. Or he talks about being born in Palestine, not Jerusalem, and being or not Israel, and being very clear about that. But who his parents are and their families and where they moved from. Like, I feel like his whole world was kind of impenetrable, actually, to him.
Yeah.
And just to say that, he mentioned Palestine because he was born before Israel was established after World War II. I guess I don't that the way that you describe it, kind of, then that way I don't feel out of place in but compared to what he went through. Another thing that he described is, even though he was born in Palestine, he was Christian. He was a Christian, and so that's the religious that they were practicing.
His grandfather was a Baptist minister.
Yes. And so that's one of the. But just answering the question, I don't feel I don't feel that the way that he kind of described throughout his books, that idea of the out of place.
Yeah, same. Not necessarily out of place, but there's some references that I don't always get, just having not grown up certain years of my life in this country, and so there's certain sort of cultural references that I have to go look up. Easier for me. My sister, who is older, yes, completely different because she was the oldest of the four of us. So when my parents came back to the States, so I think there is a little bit of, we're all Americans, but we all have different different experiences, and kind of ties back. Great question, Susan. I did want to speak, and Kyla, you talked about this just a little bit. The idea of, the English and the Arabic, and the mom speaking a different type of Arabic from the dad, a more sophisticated classical Arabic, versus his not as educated, and how she was, labeled, because they did a lot of moving, his parents and the parents before. So it was very fluid. But I wanted to unpack just a little bit about his name, right? The English versus the Arab name, and what that looks like, and what part that plays or doesn't play in fitting in, and the anglicizing of names. And I wanted to just kind of unpack that, because, we like to, and I think maybe it's an American cultural thing, because I don't know if I really find it so much when I was in other countries. But if it's a name we don't understand, we want to rename that person. Oh, well, I'll just call you Sally, and the name is not that, right? It's almost, to me, a little disrespectful unless the person offers it up. But even when people offer it up, it's like, no, I want to call you your name. What is your name? I will learn it, unless they really don't want. So I just wanted to unpack that a little bit. Your thoughts and what impact that plays. Did that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I have a couple different comments on that. Like, there's two things. I guess on a personal level, I am misnamed 98% of the time, both my first and my last name. I'm almost never called Kyla, and my last name is never spelled correctly. Like, I will spell it HANINGTON, one N in a row. I will literally say it every time. And I still get Harrington or two N's, and I can never find my medical records. And I don't feel like, it's just, it is constantly misnamed. Right. And so on one hand, my patience for that is extremely thin. And I try to remember that even though it's happened to me thousands of times, it's this particular person's first time misnaming me, and I need to be cool. But it's very hard. It is very challenging. And I also know that when I lived in Hawaii, I had a lot of friends, wonderful friends, whose parents had given them names from their country of origin, not people who were not white Americans, let's say, and they were giving them names from their country of origin, and which were great. And my friends would want to change their names to have more American sounding names, and some of them did. And I found myself, and I regret this. Like, I'm not, but I'm 16-year-old Kyla. Okay, put it out here for everybody. I would then tell these people, no, don't change your name. And the reason why I feel guilty about that is it's not my place to tell people what their name should be. And I'm embarrassed that I felt like it was appropriate for me to be like, no, don't change your name. So I sort of feel a stab in my heart about that. But I also know this idea of, to your point, Renee, of that we should be able to live in a world where people have a diversity of names, and some of them are hard. KYLA is apparently a lot harder than you think it is. Okay. But that we can face the challenge. We can, write little phonetic spelling. And I do this with our programmings. I'll give phonetic spelling, and I don't always get it right. Some of them I can't pronounce because of my speech problem. Some of them I just get in my head and I mispronounce. And that's not good enough. I want to do better. But I think if we can all I would like us all to try to meet that challenge. And at the same time, when I think about my friends on Hawaii, how long do you want to have people mispronounce your name before you're like, fine, call me Kayla. I changed my name. Like,
Yeah.
Because in this case, he was actually he didn't change his name, right? He was actually named Edward. I think it was his dad when he came to the United States. His dad also changes his name, right? And then when he went back. Okay.
What's I never could quite understand sort of, and maybe I didn't get that part, but the Saeed, that all of the secrets, maybe this gets us to the family secrets, and why do families secret, right?
Yeah.
Right. And
It's
so
also a question, where did Saeed come from? Like, where did that name come from?
right. He never, right. And his dad, I love the way he said it though, almost like his dad, how did he say? He said his dad answered, like there was 10 questions or 10 things that his dad would say about his background, period. It was a script. It never changed. And it was very thin. And I was reflecting, like, I wonder, what is that about? What is that about, right? Lots of movement pre-World War I and during the Ottoman Empire for his dad. And Saeed, he could never get a straight answer. So, yeah, what is that?
Kyla?
Well, I was just reading. I don't have an answer, but I was reading on page 19. And thus I became Edward, a creation of my parents whose daily travails a quite different but quite dormant inner self was able to observe, though most of the time was powerless to help. Edward was principally the son, then the brother, then finally the boy who went to school and unsuccessfully tried to follow or ignore and circumvent all the rules. His creation, and I feel like his creation of him as self, but also him as Edward,
right.
Was made necessary by the fact that his parents were themselves self-creations, two Palestinians with dramatically different backgrounds and temperaments living in colonial Cairo as members of a Christian minority within a large part of minorities with only each other for support, without any precedent of what they were doing except an odd combination of pre-war Palestinian habit, American lore picked up in random in books and magazines. This sentence is very long. I'm going to stop. But it's just, like... Is his name Edward akin to, have you met people in the United States who choose to give their daughters gender neutral or even masculine sounding names because they believe that their daughters will face discrimination if they have a name that sounds conventionally feminine? Have you met people like this?
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if this is is there an American, and I don't think that Edward is necessarily American per se. It might also be British or, but Australian or, but is it some sort of...
He did say at the beginning that he was named Edward. His mother named him Edward because she thought that King Edward was a lovely fellow, or after the British monarch.
Yeah, the Prince Edward.
Right, Prince, right. Yes. That's right. A favorite. But I think, then it's we have to think about what was happening. He was born in 1911, I think, right? And so, the British kingdom, the kingdom, right, ruled Britannia, right? The sun never set on the kingdom, all of the, colonies, if we want to talk about colonization, right? And so the British influence was strong in the Middle East during the time that he was born, and his mom, who at 18 married his dad, who was almost 20 years older, which is not unusual culturally.
Arranged marriage.
Right, exactly. Very much, cultural. And so I wonder if part of that came into, maybe they didn't consider them secrets, but it's like, there's nothing to see here, nothing to talk about, right? Greater Syria, right? Of some, the grandmother was from Lebanon, right? So you've got all of this. From our American perspective, we don't understand or realize that region of the world was very cosmopolitan. Like everybody moved around and mixed up, and right. And maybe it just wasn't important. Maybe he kind of alludes to it. His dad's, whatever his family circumstances, once he came to America at a young age and then went back at a young age, only he didn't want to go back, but his mom, right, the grandma, he went back for her, but kind of like reinvented himself from the American perspective. I don't know if he talks more about that later, but I found that interesting in how he maybe even suggested that maybe his dad had a family here before he went back. You know what I'm saying? So it's, yeah. secrets.
Yeah.
What do they do? What do they do to us? It sent him on this quest. Maybe the secrets are part of Out of Place. So go ahead.
Yeah. No, I was just going to mention that even I think you mentioned this early. Even on page 7, Kyla, they talk about how his father was Wali Ibrahim.
Yeah.
And then he said, "I still do not know where Asid came from." So it's kind of like when you were discussing that of the name that he didn't even know where the Asid came from.
But growing up, believing or being told that it was a family name, but when he actually, as an adult, starts to research, it's like, this is not a family name. There are no Saids.
Yeah. And what is it? What happens to you if what you're told by your parents is unreliable? If your parents are unreliable narrators?
Yeah.
Because we can handle, I feel like, you talked to Renee about your family, like that it wasn't, where you're from was not relevant. What was relevant was this family. And now you're a family that you've made with Mark, that's irrelevant.
Right.
What happens if this family unit is comprised of unreliable narrators?
Yeah.
Because I do think the family can be that structure building block.
I think you feel out of place.
No.
There we go.
No.
I have to remember it's opposite. You feel out of place. Yeah.
Well, we provide Ms. Vivian with her answers to a question.
That's right. We keep circling back to Ms. Vivian's question, but you do, and I think it's reflective in his book about this quest. His quest is all of his life feeling this like something.
If I could, I just wanted to switch subjects. Again, one of the things with diversity dialogue often involves Kyla talking about things that she had to learn. So I would like to now talk about something I had to learn. As I was reading this, I was really aware of how excruciatingly little I know about Israel, Palestine, Egypt. Like I'm so sorry, Dr. Keith Smith, Vancouver Island University. I loved your class on Middle Eastern history. I really did. But I apparently remember nothing about it because I felt like this. I was reading this. I felt so, how can I live to be 49 and know so little about such a important and constantly contested and, just perpetually compelling and relevant part of the world. And so first of all, I welcome your education. If for you, this was all very familiar, I'd love to hear about it. But also, did either one of you feel a little bit out of place in terms of your education about this?
Well, see, because I had the cheat sheet because I lived in the Middle East, right? So no, and those the dynamics spoken in the book are still real and relevant today. And living in Lebanon, the whole Palestinian and Israeli conflict spilled over into Lebanon and was the genesis of the Lebanese civil war from 1975 to 1991. And I lived there during that time twice. So no, it was familiar in just some of the things, but that's only because, like I said, I had the cheat sheet. And that's not something we learn here, right? Mm-hmm. We catch stuff from the news, right? But it is a complex region, rich with traditions and culture and conflict.
Yeah, unless also if you even, probably if you like history, that is a region that you will definitely look into because it's it is a cradle of religion. But religion. So that's something that if you into that, you read that. So.
Well, and when we say religion, from the Western perspective, right?
From the Western
of three of the major.
Yes.
Yeah, as Kyla said, the book it's dense, so it's not one that you're just going to sit down and be able to read. You have to read it, put it down, pick it up, put it down, because it is dense. You've got to think, and it's not something that you're like, oh, I can knock this out in 8 hours or.
And probably, I think maybe one of the best probably it's read the other books that he has, that where he discusses certain topics that might be interest in, and then after that probably read his personal
His memoir,
memoir. Probably that would make sense instead of somebody venturing just to read this first without actually reading the other books. I don't know, just because I, like you two, had a struggle going through certain information in this book.
Yeah, I've been putting links in the chat. So for those of you who are watching on YouTube, I've been putting links into the YouTube chat. Unfortunately, the Facebook stream isn't working right now, but you can also always email our office for information. But on YouTube, we put in the there's a link to Orientalism, which is the book that came out in 1978 that has been sort of a really seminal text as it relates to world and group relationships that we started talking about in the beginning. Earlier in the conversation, I did put a link into the book we're talking about tonight, but I agree with Jose that really, I think learning about this othering concept that he brought into our sociological perspective is probably great. And I've also been putting in some links. There's a Washington Post article that I read from, and then I also just put in the link for a New Yorker piece that I'm hoping that you folks can access, anyone who's interested. So please do check the chat where you're watching, or email me, and I'll put my email up on the screen, or office email up on the screen in just a second, where you can reach out if you have any questions. I'm going to mute myself while I do that. So Jose and Renee, take it away.
Well, we talked about it a little bit, but sort of the stigma of English or not English, or the stigma of languages. And why do we associate? Well, let me say this. I think that here in the States, we are definitely more tolerant about people who don't speak perfect English. Maybe it's just me, but I see us as a culture. We go out of our way to try and understand. I know that it's not the same in other cultures. I'm not going to call out a country, France. I'm not going to call it out. France, French. If you don't speak perfect French, there's no talk. It's like, basically get away from me, stop talking. So what is this stigma of language and tolerance, and what does it mean, or what doesn't it mean? Am I placing too much emphasis on it?
Well, I do think that language and how we speak the language and the place that we're in is, again, another way that we can be othered. Mm-hmm. So I will say that looking the way that I look and speaking the way that I look, I am never presumed to not be a natural born American. Whereas somebody else could have lived, and I know lots of people who live in the States way longer than I have, who are, and are sort of never allowed to be Americans in the way that, I was allowed to be an American when I wasn't one. So I think it is another way that we categorize and separate people.
We actually do that even internally, right? Remember the whole, and Kyla, maybe you weren't here, the whole discussion about Ebonics versus
Oh yeah.
And the whole, the politics of that, and stigma and separating, and that's a whole separate discussion, right? What is proper English?
Right. And who decides who's the arbiter of proper English?
Right.
I can tell you who is in the office.
That's right. Right. And it gets really to this whole discussion about professionalism that is occurring now in the workplace, and who determines and who says that dressing a certain way, or right. Put on our discrimination hat and look at it through that lens, and some of the litigation when it came to hairstyles and what was considered professional, and sort of the whole fight, the Crown laws, the whole fight about being able to wear natural hair and to not have that be viewed as a negative, right? And so I think it all is part of a sub part of this narrative about language and who decides what is correct or proper. Yeah. We know that language evolves. Even the English language in particular, it's ever evolving. We have new words every year, right?
Yeah.
And who decides that that's okay? But anyway, so let's unpack that in the last 8 minutes.
Yeah, I think I agree with you that let me just generalize. The United States is more accepting, so people in the United States probably more accepting of people doesn't speak the language. They're more able to accommodate. But even within the United States, there might be certain regions or certain locations that they're not that willing to accommodate, right? And so it's not necessarily. I think it goes with, especially here in the United States, that there's certain areas of the certain region of the country that speak different than other region, and there's regions in this country that are probably more acceptant or people that doesn't speak the language and are willing to accommodate that. But there are also, want to use the word, other people that are not willing to accommodate or accept the uses of other language.
But I do think, and I'll just, because I'll let Kyla, I'll stop talking. But I do think that overall we are more. We try to, like, I watch people sometimes like stop, a stranger, and really try to understand what they're saying and helping, and whether it's through gestures and right. But and maybe I'm just reflecting on my own experiences. But in France, for instance, like if you didn't speak perfect French, literally it was like and just stop talking, like wave you off. I'm not going to stop and help when you're really just asking for directions.
Yeah, but I don't know if either one of you have heard. I know I think I read an article in the past, not recent like
That's
this year or last year, but a couple of years ago, about people complaining, now when you call a number of the company, they tell you Mark II if you want something Spanish, like the option. I know people in the past were complaining about having that option there because, the idea is, well, why we have other option when we live in the United States? So it's, even though English is not the official language, but it's more of a de facto language, but it's not the official language. They were concerned about having the option of pressing 2 for Spanish. I don't know if any of you heard that about that issue like several years ago.
Definitely, and right, the whole why can't they, right? Again, that's part of the other part of political discourse. Before I answer Christian, or maybe Kyla wants to, I'll just say I learned in history, American history, and I don't know if this is factually accurate, but I do remember this discussion. Mind you, it was American history in another country. I mean, I was living in another country at an American style school, but that we were one vote away, our founding fathers, one vote from making Greek the official language here.
That would have been interesting.
Really?
Yeah.
I guess they were really not satisfied with the Great Britain at that time.
Well, of course, that was, Greek was the language, we're talking.
Wow. And I never, by going with that, because you learned that in another country. I honestly, I never. That's interesting because I never kind of heard about that. Now you're going to make me Google.
Yeah, well, and if it's on Google, everybody knows it's true. But yeah, but yeah, I don't know. I wish I could. I don't have the book or the textbook or the professor who was saying it. It was an American professor who was teaching American history in an American style school in another country. And I was just fascinated because I had just moved to this country from a Greek speaking country. It's like, wow, I would have been set. I would have come,
Yeah, you'd have been.
Yeah, I would have. So anyway, it's just fascinating.
Wait, was that in a Greek speaking country that you learned that?
No, it was in an Arabic speaking country, but I'd just come from a Greek speaking country.
Okay.
So no, it wasn't propaganda.
It's like in Latin America, and especially in Latin America or South America, the map it's not necessarily where the North America we know. It's like the South is North, and then the North is South.
Right.
So,
yeah. No.
Okay.
Nice. Carla, what do you think of Jose's question? Yeah.
Sorry, Jose's question?
Or you can just, no.
I was going to go back to language. I'm so sorry. I was still thinking about your description of being in other countries. And so my experience is I've been given a lot of grace.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, when I went to France, I was living in Denmark, and I had taken about 7 years of French in school, which I completely forgot. When I learned Danish, my French just went away. My brain's like, oh, it's a second language. Okay. And so I couldn't even say like, thank you en français. I was saying tack, like in Danish, when people said things like, I was a disaster. But what we did do is, we had a little, I never presumed people would speak English to me. And so I always had a guidebook. I always tried to speak in a different language. And I will say that my experience has been as a witness, it's when English speakers go to other countries or other English speaking, non-English speaking places and assume that they will be spoken to in English, that I've seen the most vigorous pushback. But what I was sitting here smiling about was when I lived in Denmark. I'm not a skinny person, and I was in Denmark, and everyone's got their stuff. So there were some people in Denmark who told me, make sure that when you meet people, you tell them that you're Canadian, because they're going to think that you're German. And you don't want them to think you're German. You've got to tell them you're Canadian. So everyone's got their stuff. So I really made an effort to say, so the word for Canadian in Denmark is in Danish. I just said Denmark. Wow.
Yes, you did.
And the word for Canadian in Danish is essentially, and it's very difficult for me to say, but Canadiansk. But the word for Chinese in Danish is Kaniskus. So I went around for 3 years telling people that I was Chinese. And I remember these, like, because at that time, when I was in Denmark, there was, people my age spoke English, but really people who were in the 40s or 50s, they didn't, and so we're just going to have to speak in. And I just remember these, like, very sweet 70-year-old women just looking at me and saying, in Danish, but they'd say, you're Chinese. I was like, no. So I was just thinking you were talking about that I've been very, again, like, I look the way that I'm very well aware, I'm a white woman, English speaking woman with a big goofy grin, and I'm given a lot of grace. And I just remembered, I was laughing away at having spent 3 years telling people in Denmark that I was Chinese. So
I love that. Okay, let me just clean it up. I'm not outing all of France, honestly. It's just the Parisian. No. Okay, that's my bias. It was in Paris. Other place else, lovely. Trying to understand my poor French as I was trying to communicate. Even other places in Paris that were not Parisians, but other people who, anyway. But that's my bias. I claim it. I'm working on it.
No, it can be difficult. Like we went to Montreal we had to fly to Montreal to do our immigration interviews here. And so, like, to come here, we had to fly to Montreal from British Columbia. And so at that time, my oldest daughter was like 15, and we basically made her do all the translation for us. And this is in Canada, but we needed to communicate in French.
Yeah.
And we did not, like, to order food, like, we needed to have French, and we didn't have what we needed to get by. And so
Montreal in particular. Yeah.
Right. And it could be stressful. I haven't had it can be very stressful. So
yeah.
No.
Wait, they try not to speak English?
Well, so
I'm like, wait, At some point, I was considering going over there, but if I have to speak French, there's no point of me going.
Yeah.
So I can talk about the political implications.
I mean, I will say this, and in closing, unlike the United States, Canada does have two official languages, French and English. So if you're working with the federal government, you need to be served in either of the two main languages. However, there are a lot of people, actually, it's about a third of the population of Canada as a whole is their mother tongue is French. And so that's a lot. You might think about a third of the population. And that's also true that there's a number of people who that's the language they speak. So it's like the same as you go to British Columbia and try and speak French. Unfortunately, I'm embarrassed to say, I'm not going to be able to help you. And so the same is true when you go to different parts of Quebec. Like, it's not anything even angry. It's just like literally the language that they speak French. And there is the other element, and I mean, we can go, I would love to talk about Canadian history, but there is also this, there's also sort of a political feeling about if we have to go everywhere else and be served in English everywhere else in Canada, then in Quebec, we have the right to it's British Columbia. I don't see you all speaking French to us. Ergo, I don't need to speak English to you. So there is that piece. But you should still go, Jose, bring your little guidebook and look sad. Okay? It's all about bringing a guidebook and looking sad. I have it down, and I can give you some tips. So, okay. It is that time. It's actually 8:01. We really talked for a long time about being out of place and about Edward Said. And I really hope for those of you watching that if you're not familiar with his work, that even like looking at some of these articles I put in from the New Yorker and just getting to know some of his thinking is great. And again, the book, Renee just held it up. It's called Out of Place. It is a memoir. It is a little on the challenging side. So I'll say this, if you read it and you get through it, the Office of Human Rights wants to hear from you. I put my email address up earlier. Thanks everybody for being with us. We have a bunch of events coming up as always with our friends, the library, including tomorrow night. We have the author Henna Khan in person, actually, at the Laurel Branch Library at 6:00 in conversation about her book, Amina's Voice. She's a local Montgomery County author, and you should come out to that. But you can also visit our website, civilrights.mypdc.us, and we have an events tab. And you can see our friends, the library system, pgcmls.info/events to see all the different things that are going on. Renee and Jose, thank you so much, you guys. And we're taking a 3-month break from Diversity Dialogue, so we won't be back till August, but we're looking forward to seeing all of you back in August, and have a great summer, everybody.
Right. Thank you. Thanks, Carla. Bye. Thanks, Jose. Bye.